Yeah, welcome everybody. I'm going to introduce Philipp Ursprung. It's a bit of a funny thing to do it now. But nevertheless, not everybody knows him. So a few words about him. We met in the early 90s in Geneva. I was studying art history and he had just finished. And he was about to go to Zurich. And then he came back for, I think, 6 months, was it, or 1 year, I don't remember. And he would teach a seminary. So I went there, I was a young student, and I enjoyed it very much because we would read text and analyze text and discuss it, and it was always very sharp, and there was also always quite a lot of humor involved. And one thing I really appreciated was also that Philipp Ursprung is not afraid to express his opinion, but it's never in a dogmatic way, but there's always some kind of sense of humor around this. We went to Zurich and became, in 2005, Professor for Kunstgeschichte, Professor for Art History at the University of Zurich. And in 2011, he became Professor for Architekturgeschichte und Kunstgeschichte at ETH, so at the Technical University of Zurich, where he teaches still now. He does. I don't see him that often, but I try to follow what he does. And one thing I'm impressed by is he always tries to think outside of the box. He takes his students to very strange places and exposes them to even more stranger experiences. Give a second welcome to Philipp. Thanks for introducing into the subject.
Yeah, thanks, Daniel. It's very kind to introduce me. And Christina asked me to kind of introduce not only the topic, but also introduce kind of this first day with some thoughts about land art and earth art, and I'm happy to do that. And now I would need the first slide, please. I'm taking you back almost half a century to January 1970, when Robert Smithson took part in the Creative Arts Festival at Kent State University in Kent, Ohio. It was freezing cold day, like today here in Zwoz, and he could not realize a planned mud flow as he had first thought. Instead, he decided to bury a building. He found a wooden shed used as a store for firewood and gravel that had once been part of a farm belonging to the university. On 22nd of January 1970, a contractor, following Smithson's instructions, tipped, as Smithson wrote, 20 truckloads of raw earth from a construction site on the campus onto the shed until the roof began to crack. Smithson named this performance Partially Buried Woodshed, donated the work to the university, and signed a statement stipulating that although this work should be left exposed to the elements, in every other respect it was to be maintained in its original state and to be seen as permanent. Now, by accident, the shed burned down soon after and is no longer there, but some drawings and photographs remain. Partially Buried Woodshed is not the most iconic and famous work within the short-lived movement of earth art or land art. In the English-speaking world, you say earth art. In the German-speaking world, you rather say land art, but both are the same and define a movement from the late 1960s to the mid-1970s. It stands in the shadow of more prominent works of art, such as Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty, or Michael Heitzer's Double Negative, both also from the year 1970. Yet I think it's a good entry point to both the topic of earth art and to our topic of countryside. The woodshed, again, belonged to a farm that existed before the campus of the university was developed in the early 20th century. It was kept as a storage room but it had become obsolete and was about to be demolished to give way to the campus expansion. It recalled an earlier form of economy, agriculture, that was gradually overridden by the booming economy of higher education. Of course, we can perceive this artwork as performative. The artist proposed a rule: cover a building with dirt until the roof starts to collapse, which is clear, yet which could not be totally controlled by the author. The usual building process, which starts with an excavation of dirt for the foundation and the cellar, is inverted. Dirt was piled up on a completed structure. This recalls Smithson's idea of the ruin in reverse, namely the idea that a ruin is kind of a mirror of a construction site. The building's life cycle was brought to an end irreversibly, its backbone was broken and its skeleton virtually exposed. The transformation into a work of art made the shed dysfunctional, uninhabitable, unusable for storage, but precisely this partial destruction also kept it alive. It turned into a monument of latency, of the countryside life that was both absent and present, both there and not there. It allowed the students to enter it like a grave chamber, to remember that every campus goes back to an earlier, usually agricultural act of cultivation. And it remained present on campus like a phantom that cannot find rest. So this ghost-like presence of the partially buried woodshed strikes me in relation to our interest in the deeply ambivalent issue of the countryside. Here in Zuoz, we are confronted with remnants of earlier economies, the transportation routes, commerce that brought much wealth in the early modern period, later a phase of decline mainly marked by agriculture, in the 20th century various layers of tourism and education industry. The most recent transformation consists in the increase of private secondary residences, which results in an effect that is now typical for many alpine villages, namely that it turns into a ghost town during some parts of the year. For Zuoz, for the entire alpine region, we lack a plan how to escape this dilemma. Farming is basically a heavily subsidized form of landscape architecture, which maintains a backdrop for tourism industry. This is Hans Danuser, who shows me an image of the, I would call it the distortion of these buildings, who don't really know how to behave in view of this dilemma that strikes Zuoz like many other communes. So farming is basically a subsidized form of landscape architecture that maintains a backdrop for the tourism industry. We know how to preserve the material heritage of the past. The Vice President has recalled the beautiful Dorfplatz, but we don't know what to do with the many empty stables in the Alps, for instance. Unlike the empty loft, the factory room that has been turned into an emblem of urban lifestyle, the empty stable or shed remains invisible. Partially buried woodshed makes manifest the rawness of transformation. It does not romanticize decay, but articulates it. Of course, the political tensions in the upper Engadine cannot be compared to the situation of Ohio, Kent State. This is a much more tense situation, but the tensions can also be felt in this area if we think, for instance, about the failure of the project for an Adula National Park in 2016. So I also chose partially buried woodshed as an entry point because earth art, like the cliché of the countryside, has somewhat turned into a projection surface where utopian hopes and nostalgic memories mingle. Some interpreters relate it to prehistoric monuments such as the Nazca lines in Peru or the stone circles in Stonehenge. Others are thrilled by the evocation of the sublime, be it the industrial sublime or the natural sublime. And who can resist to identify with the charismatic protagonist of earth art, those prairie wolves of the American art world like Michael Heiser, Walter de Maria, Nancy Holt, James Turrell, Robert Smithson. The connections to landscape painting and to minimal sculpture are obvious, but despite much research, the concrete connection to architecture and planning and economy are less known. And this is why I again would like to zoom back in time some more years now to June 1966, when Walter Prokosch, a partner of an engineering firm, heard Robert Smithson's contribution on the subject of shaping the environment, the artist and the city, at an urban planning symposium at Yale University. Prokosch was responsible at that time for planning the largest construction project worldwide, the new international airport that located between the Texan cities of Dallas and Fort Worth. He engaged Smithson as an artist consultant and Kunstberater, and the 28-year-old artist's encounter with the planning of megastructure widened his horizons almost overnight. He was supposed to develop an art form for this airport which could be seen from passengers arriving by plane, something which has never existed before. So he's 28, he imagines wandering earth mounds and gravel paths that could be distributed along this airport, or a web of asphalt paths that look like a giant spider web that would kind of catch the planes when they land like flies in a spider web. He also planned earth windows with broken glass that would glitter mysteriously by day and glow by night, as if the earth would open to the inner core when the passengers arrive. And he took over the idea of teamwork, which is typical for architects and engineers, but not so much for artists, and invited his colleagues Sol LeWitt, Bob Morris, and Carl Andre to participate. So it is not a wonder that after a year this contract ended without result. But an appetite for something on a very large scale had been whetted in the art world. Sol LeWitt introduced Smithson to the gallerist Virginia Dwan, and as the heiress of the Minnesota Mining and Manufacturing Corporation, Dawn was financially independent, and she shared Smithson's enthusiasm for architectural structures and media on the one hand, and for earthwork. So she tried to help Smithson realize these dreams of aerial art, and they went to New Jersey in order to find some land. They couldn't buy it. It was an old military airport on state land, but Smithson was fascinated by the airfield that they discovered with 6 radial sand runways, and decided to transfer this site into the gallery space by means of a map, a description in this text here, and a floor sculpture. So the absent site out there, the airport, which could not be transported, obviously, was transported visually and conceptually into the gallery space, and entitled A Non-Site, Pine Barrens, New Jersey, an Indoor Earthwork, 1968. And this is January 68, so today we celebrate the 50th birthday of the invention of the non-site. And the non-site, of course, is an important invention in the history of art, because it allows the artist to make a dialectic connection between the situation outside and the situation in the exhibition room. So almost overnight, this movement, which we then call earth art or land art, is institutionalized. There is a show in the Dwan Gallery called Earth Works. Then Earth Art at the Andrew Dixon White Museum at Cornell University, Land Art at the Fernsehgalerie Geri Schum, Michael Heiser's Munich Depression, Walter de Maria's Earth Room at the Galerie Heiner Friedrich in Munich. This is all 68, 69. Richard Serra's inlaid of a steel ring into the terrain vague at a dead-end road in the Bronx, also in '69. The climax then is the two monographic exhibition by Virginia Dwan of Michael Heiser's Double Negative and Robert Smithson's Spiral Jetty, all in 1970. The Spiral Jetty was constructed on the northern shore of the Great Salt Lake in Utah, and thanks to this book by Hikmet Loe that was just published, the Spiral Jetty Encyclo, we know every step of the process, so we can now really follow in detail the process, how this happened, how Smithson chooses the site. He's interested in this relation of the Salt Lake with its with its red color, because at this part of the lake it is transformed by algae. He's interested in the black color of the volcanic stones, in the white of the salt and the blue of the sky. So it's a long process of finding this site and then producing, with the help of the gallery, this famous earthwork. Now, almost immediately after the construction of Spiral Jetty, the water level rose of the Great Salt Lake, and for 20 years the Spiral Jetty was underwater. So nobody saw it. And when I was starting to work on the topic, I visited Nancy Holt, the artist and also widow of Smithson, and she told me that this was pre-internet and WeChat. She told me that the jetty had started to re-emerge, and I had to go there immediately. So I prolongated the contract of my rental car and drove there 40 hours to the Spiral Jetty. And it was just about to come out, so I could, you know, I couldn't really see it, but I can walk on it. I even bought boots so that I could stand on it. And this is what I saw. I tried to see it again many years later in 2012 on one of the expeditions with my students to weird places, and again it was gone. But my students were very kind. They said, you've talked so much about Spiral Jetty. For us, it is here. So the two times that I was at the site of Spiral Jetty, I did not really see the Spiral Jetty. I did also not perceive the Spiral Jetty as an image as it's known from photographs. And I did not perceive aesthetic qualities such as the presence, the beauty, or the sublimes, categories that are normally used to describe reactions to viewers confronted with earthworks. I did, this is, again, what trying to make contact with the artwork. What we did experience, this presence of the space, this result of the earth cut out, the presence in a very large sculpture was, of course, Double Negative by Michael Heiser. I also went there alone after visiting the Spiral Jetty, and then again with the students in 2012. But what I want to say to you that these are two absolutely different ways of perceiving sculpture. The Spiral Jetty and the Double Negative, of course, they are considered as part of earthwork, but it's a completely different way how art functions and how the perception of art functions. So Spiral Jetty, for instance, is not located in a neutral or empty or untouched landscape. In a way, it's a landscape that is marked by the history of industry. For instance, close by there is the so-called Monument of the Golden Spike. This is the place where the Transcontinental Railroad came together in the 1860s. So we're not in a natural environment, we're in an industrial environment, in an environment which was used in the 20th century also to exploit oil. This is immediately next to the Spiral Jetty, a jetty which is never shown on any photograph. It's a straight jetty that was built there to extract oil out of the Great Salt Lake. So what I want to say is that I didn't really see the artwork, but I saw everything that was around this artwork. So the landscape became like a book that I can read and perceive that tells me about the history of this area. It's functional, its economic, its industrial context. So to conclude, what did I learn from Smithson's work? How does earth art affect my own work? When asked in an interview about his interests in the real, Smithson replied, quote, "Since I can't believe in objects and I can't believe in totems, what do I believe in? Fiction." In his view, nature was, quote, "simply another 18th and 19th century fiction." And I think this is a very good lesson to learn, for me at least, because instead of dealing with the binary opposition nature-culture, I work with the concepts human, non-human, and the way that they are intertwined. A second lesson applies to the opposition between city and countryside. Smithson inspired me to shift the attention from the urban centers to the periphery, the borderlines, the wastelands, the terrain vague, the limits, the countryside, because that is where change happens and where we can perceive it much clearer than in the centers. And the third lesson applies to the narrative and the expedition and the excursion, the actual act of going somewhere and telling the story like I'm doing it now, which has become a method that Smithson developed, combining expedition and story, exemplified in the way he uses texts and essays in his oeuvre, and it continues to inspire my own work. Daniel already mentioned the seminar weeks that I do with the students that take place every semester, where we try to approach the various layers that are inscribed on each other, for instance, in this phenomenon which we try to call countryside. And the students are more and more drawn to these areas. This is last fall, where we traveled through the Tabernas Desert in southern Spain with 50 students and 10 donkeys. And with this, I'm concluding, because it's also an announcement of the film that the artist collective U5 is going to project tonight, called Human Crater. It's a research project that I'm conducting with a group of artists and scholars in Singapore and Indonesia and the island of Java, where we follow the footsteps of a 19th century explorer and visit 17 volcanoes. This can be seen tonight at the Castel in this movie. But wherever I go, and this is on the foot of one of the volcanoes in Indonesia, Smithson always comes with me, and the partially buried woodshed always remains. Thank you for the attention.